Good day, and welcome to another AI podcast at digitVIEW.
Where innovation meets insight, machine learning to responsible AI.
Imagine you are sitting in a completely silent room. Like nothing is happening. You're just sitting there.
Right.
Suddenly this invisible wave hits you. And it's a frequency so incredibly low that your ears cannot even register it as sound.
You don't hear a thing.
Exactly. But within seconds, your blood pressure inexplicably drops. Your vision begins to blur at the edges. And this profound wave of nausea just washes over you. You feel like you are violently seasick, even though you are sitting perfectly still in a chair.
It sounds like science fiction.
It really does. But what you just experienced in this scenario isn't a sudden illness. It's not a biological malfunction. It is just acoustic physics. It is the raw, unadulterated power of sound.
And that completely shatters the way we are, taught to think about our senses. We spend our whole lives treating sound as this invisible, harmless delivery system.
Right, like it's just a radio wave.
Exactly. We treat it like it's just a vehicle carrying packages of information to our ears.
Yeah.
But when you look at the raw data, sound operates on a continuum that is far more aggressive and, far more intimate than that.
Intimate is a good word for it.
Yeah, because on one end, it is a physical, mechanical force capable of breaking solid matter. And on the other end, it is a profound emotional catalyst that actively alters human biology.
So the mission for today's deep dive is to really explore that continuum for you. We are looking at a massive stack of research that synthesizes phonetics, neurobiology, evolutionary psychology, and acoustic physics.
It's a huge cross-section of science.
It really is.
Yeah.
And when you look at all these different disciplines side by side, a very clear picture emerges. Sound is essentially the hidden operating system of human experience.
I love that phrase.
Thanks, yeah. It's this program running constantly in the background. It influences everything from the words we instinctively trust to the way our internal organs function. And it does all of this completely without our conscious permission.
Hidden operating system captures it beautifully. And if we want to understand how that code is actually written, we have to start at the most microscopic level of human communication.
You mean down to the syllables?
Right. We have to look at the individual letters and syllables we use every single day, because embedded inside those sounds are hidden emotional triggers.
See, I always learned, and I think it's just a universally accepted assumption for most people, that the words we use are completely random.
That's what most of us are taught.
Like there is no inherent logical reason a dog is called a dog instead of, I don't know, a blorf or a fizz.
A fizz, right.
A group of humans a long time ago just pointed at that animal, made a random sound, and everyone eventually agreed on it. That's how I thought it worked.
Well, that assumption actually has a formal name in linguistics. It's called the Saussurean principle.
Okay, named after someone.
Yeah, Ferdinand de Saussure. It's the foundational bedrock of modern linguistics, and it argues for what he called the arbitrariness of the sign.
The arbitrariness of the sign, meaning it's just made up.
Exactly. The theory states that the relationship between the phonetic form of a word, like the literal acoustic shape of it, and its semantic meaning, is purely conventional. We just memorize the rules.
But this new research we're looking at absolutely tears that assumption apart.
It really does.
It introduces this entire field called phonaesthetics and sound symbolism. And the core argument here is that the physical sounds of language actually possess inherent emotional and sensory weight long before we even assign a dictionary definition to them.
Linguists refer to this non-arbitrary link as iconicity.
Iconicity, okay.
Yeah, it basically means the acoustic properties of a sound biologically map onto the concept it represents. And we see the most compelling, undeniable evidence for this when we look at something called phone's themes.
Man, this concept completely changed how I look at the English language.
Yeah.
A phone's theme is basically a specific cluster of sounds that universally evokes a specific meaning or feeling across a massive chunk of our vocabulary.
So let's trace the mechanics of this for you. Take the consonant cluster.
Jewel.
Like GL.
Right, GL.
If you look at the English lexicon, words that begin with that specific GL sound are overwhelmingly tied to concepts of light, vision, and luminosity.
Oh, like glimmer.
Glow.
Gleam, glitter, glisten, glare.
Exactly. Now shift your mouth and make the SN sound. That specific phonetic cluster is inexplicably linked to the nasal cavity, to unpleasant odors or breathing functions.
So sniff, sneeze, snore, snarl, snout, snot.
Right.
It's actually strange once you pay attention to it. Just making the SN sound almost forces your upper lip to pull back and your nose to crinkle.
That physical sensation you are describing is proprioception, and it is highly relevant here. The physical architecture of your mouth when producing these sounds literally mirrors the meaning. Look at the CL cluster.
Okay, CL.
It signifies closure, mechanical gripping, or clinging.
Clasp, clutch, clamp,
Cling.
cleave. Wow, my jaw literally clamps shut when I articulate the key L part.
Then you have BL, which involves building up air behind your lips and releasing it. It denotes a sudden emission or bursting.
Like blare, blast, blurt, blow.
Or the TR cluster, which requires the tongue to pull back against the roof of the mouth. It signifies pulling, dragging, or laborious movement. Trail, trudge, trample.
The ones that signify texture are fascinating too. Like gar is always rough, guttural, or displeasing. Grate, growl, grumble, grit.
And C is structural failure or breaking. Crack, creak, crunch, crash, crumble.
But you can flip the physical sensation entirely. What about the smooth ones?
Right, like the STOBU cluster. That denotes smooth, sweeping, or oscillating movements. Sweep, sway, swing, swirl.
And SL, which feels exactly like what it describes. It's friction-reduced, slippery movement, slide, slip, slither, sleek.
Now, a skeptic might look at this list and say, well, this is just an echo chamber of the English language.
Right, like maybe English speakers just got into a habit thousands of years ago.
Exactly. But the cross-linguistic studies completely invalidate that critique. When you look across disparate language families, the emotional and physical coding of sounds remains.
The example in the research that stood out to me was the FL cluster. In English, it represents flowing movement, liquidity, or rapid flight. Flow, fly, flutter, fluid. But you're saying this isn't just an English quirk.
Not at all. If you look at Spanish, you find words like fluer for flow and voler for fly. In French, you have flotter to float. In German, fließen to flow or fluggen to fly.
That's wild. So the FL acoustic pattern equates to flowing flight across languages that have diverged for millennia.
Right. This tells us that these associations transcend cultural boundaries. We are physiologically reacting to the shape of the sound itself.
And that physical reaction to acoustic shape brings us to the kiki-booba effect.
A classic.
For anyone who hasn't encountered this, it's a very famous psychological experiment. If I put two drawings in front of you, one is a jagged, sharp, star-like shape, and the other is a soft, rounded, cloud-like shape, and I tell you that one is named Kiki and the other is named Booba, you instinctively know which is which.
Across demographics, ages, and cultures, almost 100% of participants point to the spiky shape and say it is Kiki, and point to the rounded shape and say it is Booba.
It's just so immediate.
It is. And for decades, scientists knew this happened, but they debated the exact mechanism. The recent scholarship we are reviewing points to the missing link being affective arousal.
Meaning the sound literally stimulates our nervous system in a specific way.
Yes. Let's break down the phonetic categories. Kiki is built on sharp, high-frequency, voiceless plosive sounds. The K sound requires a sudden burst of air.
Like a tiny explosion in your mouth.
Exactly. Phonetically, this is highly arousing. It stimulates the nervous system, creating a sensation of sharpness or tension. Booba, on the other hand, utilizes resonant voiced sounds. The B and the U are sonorous.
They sort of roll out.
Yeah, they have continuous airflow and low-frequency resonance. They literally calm the nervous system.
So the phonetics themselves carry an emotional payload based on how they move air. The research breaks these into distinct buckets.
Right.
You have sonorous sounds, the vowels and liquids like L or R when it's rolled softly. These have high acoustic prominence, they feel musical, and they lower arousal.
But then you have hissing sibilants like S and sh.
Right, those are made of turbulent high-frequency noise, and they trigger high arousal, which can feel deeply negative or urgent.
You also have the abrupt plosives, the P, T, and T sounds. Like you said, they involve completely closing off the airflow in your mouth and then releasing it in a microscopic explosion. These convey sudden energy, joy, or alarm.
And finally, the nasals, the M and N sounds. Airflow is diverted through the nasal cavity, creating a low-frequency hum. These consistently convey intimacy, melancholy, or softness across global languages.
It totally reframes how you read poetry, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The research actually looks at the word lullaby. It's entirely constructed of that soothing, sonorous L sound and soft vowels. It mathematically correlates with passivity and pleasantness.
Contrast that with the word roar. It doubles down on the arousing, high-activity, grating R sound.
It's aggressive.
Very. And this phonetic architecture is utilized unconsciously by the greatest writers in history. The researchers conducted quantitative phonetic comparisons of classical Chinese poets.
Oh, right, Li Bai and Du Fu.
Yes. They analyzed Li Bai, a poet famous for his optimistic, expansive themes. The data showed he instinctively preferred positive sound features, sonorous, flowing characters.
But when they analyzed Du Fu, whose poetry explores tragedy, hardship, and darker themes, what did they find?
They found a statistically massive increase in phonemes associated with negative valence and high arousal. They weren't just picking words for their definitions. They were orchestrating the physical air pressure to match the emotion.
Okay, I hear all this, but I really have to push back here.
Go for it.
Isn't there a chicken and egg problem? Like, if I grew up in a society that taught me a snake is scary and a snake slithers and strikes with those harsh sibilant sounds, of course my brain reacts negatively to the S sound.
That's a fair point.
Couldn't this just be deep cultural conditioning? Are we absolutely sure this is an objective biological reflex?
It is the most vital question to ask, nature versus nurture. But the cognitive neuroscience data, specifically from lexical decision tasks, heavily supports the biological reflex.
How so?
Well, when researchers put subjects in a lab and monitor their brain's processing speed, they find that humans process words with positive emotional valences significantly faster than neutral words.
Okay.
But when a word contains highly arousing negative phonetics, something entirely different happens. The brain enters a state of what they call automatic vigilance.
Automatic vigilance. What is the actual mechanism of that? What is the brain doing?
It is literally hitting the brakes. When your auditory cortex registers a highly arousing or negative sound, like a sharp plosive or a harsh sibilant, it halts its standard linguistic processing.
Wait, it stops trying to understand the word.
Exactly. It stops trying to find the dictionary definition of the word and instead prioritizes an emotional and threat level evaluation of the stimulus. Your cognitive processing time slows down because your primitive brain takes over to assess the danger.
Wow.
You can't culturally condition a millisecond delay in the auditory cortex. That is hardwired biology overriding your vocabulary.
That is profound. So our brains are biologically wired to react to certain acoustic shapes faster than others, and to literally freeze our language processing when we hear negative or sharp sounds.
Yes.
If it's biological, it implies an evolutionary imperative, like, why did our brains evolve to hit the brakes for a K, but relax for an M?
To understand that, we have to view human language not as an invention that just appeared out of thin air, but as a complex adaptation.
Right.
The architecture of our vocabulary is built directly on top of the ancient alarm systems used by early hominids and other species.
And the sheer scale of the data supporting this is wild. The researchers analyzed a data set of roughly 37,000 words across 5 distinct languages: English, Spanish, Dutch, German, and Polish.
A massive study.
They wanted to know where the emotion lives in a word. And they found that the very first phoneme, the absolute beginning microsound of the word, predicts its emotional valence more accurately than any other sound in the word.
Think about the mechanics of survival. If you are standing in a forest and a threat appears, averting that danger is fundamentally more urgent than acquiring a reward.
You can find berries later, but you have to survive the predator right now.
Exactly. Therefore, the acoustic structure of our language evolved to prioritize the rapid signaling of a threat.
Which perfectly explains why the most negative, alarming words often start with those abrupt, rapid phonemes.
Yes.
If there's a predator, you do not have time to slowly enunciate a beautifully resonant, sonorous vowel. You need an abrupt plosive or a high-frequency sibilant to slice through the ambient noise of the forest instantly.
By putting the emotional payload on the very first microsecond of the word, the listener's brain triggers that automatic vigilance before the speaker has even finished the syllable.
It functions as a biological early warning system.
Precisely. And we can observe the unbroken lineage of this acoustic trigger by looking at non-human primates today. The studies on East African vervets and West African green monkeys are a perfect illustration.
What's the connection between those two specific monkeys?
Well, it's about geography and time. These two species have been separated by evolution and thousands of miles of geography for an incredibly long period. They do not interact.
Right.
And yet, when researchers recorded their alarm calls, they discovered that both species produce a highly similar, evolutionarily conserved acoustic sequence, specifically in response to eagles.
Wait, really? So a threat from above triggers the exact same phonetic sequence in two separated species?
Yes. The neurological link between the visual perception of an aerial predator and the specific motor vocal program required to squeeze the lungs and vocal cords to produce that specific acoustic shape, it has survived millennia of evolutionary drift.
That's incredible.
Our own ancestors utilized the same deeply conserved biological mechanics.
But survival on the savannah wasn't just about screaming when an eagle swooped down. Surviving meant staying together, which introduces the vocal grooming hypothesis.
This hypothesis addresses the sociology of early human survival. In smaller primate groups, individuals bond and maintain alliances through physical grooming.
Picking bugs and dirt out of each other's fur.
Right. That physical touch stimulates endorphin release and lowers heart rates. It is the social glue. But as human ancestors became more biologically successful, our tribe sizes expanded.
We hit a mathematical wall. I mean, if there are 150 people in your tribe, there simply aren't enough daylight hours to physically groom everyone and maintain those vital social alliances.
Precisely. Physical touch didn't scale. So communal vocalizations emerged to fill that gap. These early acoustic exchanges likely had zero propositional meaning.
They weren't conveying specific information like the river is dry or let's hunt.
No, they relied purely on rhythm, pitch matching, and melody. It was rhythmic chorusing. We use synchronized sound waves to stimulate the same endorphin release and behavioral synchronization across a wide group simultaneously. We touched each other with sound.
Which completely frames why singing in a choir or cheering in a stadium feels so deeply cathartic today.
Absolutely.
But the ultimate proof of this ancestral reliance on melody over meaning is how we talk to babies. The research dives into infant-directed speech, or IDS.
What is colloquially known as baby talk.
Right. No matter what culture you visit or what language family they belong to, parents globally use the exact same acoustic profile when talking to an infant.
It's universal.
They use extreme pitch variability. Their voices swing wildly high and low, and they use incredibly exaggerated slowed-down rhythms. We instinctively modulate our sound waves to communicate with these infants.
The biological context here is crucial. Human infants are altricial. Compared to a horse that can run hours after birth, a human baby is born incredibly underdeveloped neurologically.
They are entirely helpless.
Yes, and they rely on caregivers for an extended period. Because their cortex cannot process semantic vocabulary, the caregiver relies on the acoustic properties of sound.
I was thinking about how to visualize this, and the best way I can describe infant-directed speech is that it acts like an evolutionary Wi-Fi connection.
A Wi-Fi connection, I like that.
Yeah, it allows a parent to wirelessly download emotional states, safety cues, and arousal levels directly into a baby's nervous system, long before that baby has the cognitive password to actually log in and understand the vocabulary.
That is a highly functional metaphor. The parent's pitch and rhythm act as a metronome for the baby's developing nervous system. So, connecting the evolutionary dots here, the reason we inherently use musicality to soothe babies, the reason chorusing bonds us, and the reason our brain hits the brakes at sharp hissing noises is simple survival.
Right.
Our ancestors who lacked these acoustic reflexes, who didn't bond through vocal grooming, or who ignored the sharp phonetic alarm call, were removed from the gene pool.
Okay, so we have established why we evolved to react to sound this way. We needed to survive. But this is the part that genuinely fascinates me. How is the physical brain actually executing this in real time?
The mechanics of it.
Yeah, how does a mechanical vibration moving through the air get absorbed by the ear and translated into a complex emotion or meaning so incredibly fast?
To map that process, we have to explore the neurobiology of auditory processing. And the first paradigm shift is realizing that the brain's processing of sound is not static.
It's not just a microphone.
Exactly. Your ear isn't just a microphone recording data. Your auditory cortex is a highly plastic, highly dynamic filter that constantly rewires itself based on context.
The research highlights this phenomenon of extreme plasticity with a really great example. Have you ever listened to a recording of a highly garbled, noisy sentence?
Like robotic static.
Right, just harsh buzz. You can't make out a single syllable. But then the researcher plays the clean, ungarbled version of the exact same sentence. And then they play the static version a second time.
And instantly the sentence pops out. You hear every word perfectly clearly inside the static.
It is surreal. 5 seconds prior, your brain could not find the words, and now it is impossible not to hear them. What is physically happening in the brain during those 5 seconds?
It is a process of rapid neural retuning. When you are primed with the clear sentence, the neurons in the higher levels of your auditory cortex rapidly adjust their sensitivity.
So they're changing on the fly.
Literally. They analyze the specific pitch, amplitude, and timing patterns of the clean sound, and they rebuild your acoustic filter in real time. When the static plays again, your brain dynamically suppresses the noise frequencies and amplifies the signal frequencies. You are actively constructing the sound, not just receiving it.
So how do neuroscientists actually observe the brain doing this construction work?
They track event-related potentials, or ERPs. By placing electrodes on the scalp, researchers can measure the exact milliseconds when electrical spikes occur in the brain during cognitive processing.
Okay.
To understand language comprehension, we look at two critical ERP markers, the PMN and the N400.
The PMN is the phonological mapping negativity. What is that spike representing?
The PMN occurs very early in the processing timeline. It is the brain's initial decoding of the sound's physical structure. It's the neurological equivalent of the brain saying, I have received a sound wave and I recognize the acoustic shape of these vowels and consonants.
So it is purely structural.
Yes.
But structure isn't meaning.
Yeah.
For meaning, we need the N400 response.
Exactly. The N400 is a massive electrical spike that happens about 400 milliseconds after you hear a word. It represents semantic integration,
Which reads?
this is the exact moment your brain reaches into its vast mental dictionary. The mental lexicon finds the definition of the word and integrates it into the context of the sentence you are hearing.
But this is where the research connects right back to the Kiki-Booba effect and phones themes. Researchers tested how the brain processes pseudo-words.
Completely fake, made-up words.
Right, but fake words that possess sound symbolic properties.
And the results were stunning. When a subject hears a pseudo-word, but its phonetic structure strongly implies a specific shape or feeling like a spiky sound, their brain triggers an N400 response just as it would for a real dictionary word.
Wait, if the N400 is the brain looking up a definition in its dictionary, why is it firing for a word that doesn't exist?
Because the brain doesn't view the phonetic shape as meaningless noise. It interprets the raw acoustic features, the sharpness or the roundness, as semantic data. It assigns meaning to the physical vibration itself, proving that the sensory impression of a sound is processed as actual language by the cortex.
That implies the processing goes far deeper than just the cortex. And the study involving carbon fiber electrodes proves it.
The thalamus study.
Yes, researchers looked at the thalamus, which blew my mind because the thalamus is an incredibly deep, ancient part of the brain. It's usually associated with raw survival regulating sleep, relaying pain signals, and heart rate. It is not supposed to be involved in high-level language processing.
Traditionally, neurology viewed the thalamus merely as a sensory relay station. But when researchers monitored it during language tasks, they observed the thalamus showing significant fluctuations in neurotransmitter release.
Specifically dopamine and serotonin.
Yes, in direct, real-time response to the emotional valence of spoken words.
Dopamine and serotonin, the core chemicals driving reward, mood, and baseline survival.
The implications of this are monumental. It proves that the symbolic sounds of language have effectively hijacked our most primitive neurobiology.
That's crazy to think about.
The exact same ancient brain structures that evolved to release adrenaline when hearing a lion roar or dopamine when hearing a crackling fire are now releasing those identical chemicals in response to mere syllables.
Which provides the perfect mechanical explanation for swearing.
Ah, yes.
The research dedicates a whole section to taboo words and expletives.
Yeah.
Because structurally, a swear word is just a collection of vowels and consonants. But neurologically, it functions as a biological weapon. They use a dual route model to explain this.
When you hear a normal neutral word, it travels the standard cognitive route. Auditory cortex, PMN structural check, N400 semantic integration. It's a polite, civilized pathway.
Right.
But taboo words are imbued with extreme emotional arousal and high social risk. Because of that heavy emotional payload, they bypass the standard cortical pathways entirely. They take a neurological shortcut.
They route directly into the amygdalar hippocampal pathway.
Which is the dense neural network responsible for emotional memory consolidation and threat detection. When a word hits the amygdala, it triggers an immediate physiological response. A slight spike in heart rate, a micro-sweat response.
And because it hits the hippocampus, it results in shallow encoding.
Exactly.
Shallow encoding meaning you don't even have to try to memorize it, right?
Correct. Usually memorizing information requires deep, conscious effort. But because swear words trigger the amygdala's threat response, the hippocampus instantly sears the memory into your brain.
Like you can vividly remember a sudden, highly offensive insult hurled at you on the street years ago, even if you weren't paying attention to the context.
The brain bypassed your polite language centers and logged it as a survival event.
So swearing isn't just bad manners. It is literally a biological hack. It is the acoustic equivalent of hitting the brain's emotional panic button to ensure that the listener never forgets what you just said. You are physically forcing their primitive memory center to record your sound wave.
Sound hacks the brain's chemistry. But we must never forget that before a sound wave triggers serotonin or an N400 response, it is fundamentally a mechanical wave moving through physical space.
It's physical energy.
Yes. And if a vibration has the power to manipulate the electrical firing of neurons, it absolutely has the power to manipulate, move, and destroy physical matter within our bodies.
If we're talking about sound physically destroying matter, we have to look at the raw acoustic physics. Because at its core, sound is just mechanical energy. It is a pressure disturbance traveling through a medium, whether that medium is the air in this room, a pool of water, or human tissue.
The physics governing this are incredibly elegant. The sheer power of a sound wave is proportional to the square of its amplitude. But the critical concept to grasp here is acoustic intensity.
Okay, acoustic intensity.
The formula is intensity equals power divided by area.
I like to think of it like a flashlight.
Yeah.
If you turn on a standard flashlight and shine it at a wall, the light spreads out over a wide area. It's bright, but it's harmless. But if you take that exact same amount of light energy and focus it through a lens into a microscopic point like a laser pointer, it becomes so intense it can burn a hole through a piece of paper.
Exactly.
Sound operates on the exact same physical principle. If you take acoustic power and focus it onto a tiny area, the intensity becomes weaponized.
That laser analogy perfectly describes how we achieved medical marvels like ultrasound. Ultrasound refers to sound waves at frequencies above 20,000 hertz, which is just beyond the upper limit of human hearing.
We can't hear it.
Right. Because the frequencies are so high, the wavelengths are very short. This allows them to travel in straight lines and reflect off small objects, which is why we use low-intensity ultrasound to safely bounce sound off a fetus to create an image in the womb.
But when you apply that formula focusing immense acoustic power onto a microscopic area, you get a procedure called lithotripsy.
Lithotripsy is an astonishing application of acoustic intensity. Doctors take high-intensity ultrasound waves and focus them precisely on a kidney stone deep inside the patient's body.
Wait, how does vibration in the air actually turn a solid calcium rock into dust without cutting the person open?
It relies on a phenomenon called acoustic cavitation. When the intense sound waves hit the fluid surrounding the kidney stone, the extreme pressure fluctuations create microscopic bubbles in the fluid.
Bubbles.
But these aren't normal bubbles, they are temporary vacuums. In a fraction of a second, these microbubbles collapse and implode. When they implode, they generate microscopic shock waves of immense heat and mechanical force directly against the surface of the stone, literally eroding and crushing it into sand.
It is using invisible sound waves to create microscopic shock waves to pulverize a rock inside a human organ. That is staggering.
It is.
But if ultrasound frequencies above human hearing can destroy matter through intense focus, we have to look at the opposite end of the spectrum. Infrasound. Frequencies below 20 hertz.
Infrasound operates on a completely different set of physical rules. Because the frequencies are so low, the wavelengths are massive, sometimes dozens of meters long.
So they don't behave like high frequencies at all.
Not at all. Because they are so long, they experience very little attenuation. They do not lose their energy easily when passing through walls, earth, or human bodies. They travel vast distances. Now, we don't hear infrasound orally with our eardrums, but our physical bodies hear it through physiological resonance.
And this is where the research reads like a sci-fi horror script. The decibel scale of infrasound and its direct mechanical effect on human anatomy is terrifying. Let's walk through it step by step.
Okay, when a human body is immersed in an infrasonic field at levels below 100 decibels, the effects are subtle. You won't hear sound, but you will begin to feel a vague, unexplainable irritation.
Like a bad vibe.
Yeah, you might feel a wave of apathy or drowsiness. The massive sound waves are creating mild interference with your central nervous system's baseline rhythms.
Okay, that's uncomfortable, but it's manageable. But what happens when you turn the power up to between 110 and 120 decibels?
At 110 to 120 decibels, the sound wave begins to physically modulate your autonomic nervous system. Your blood pressure drops. Respiratory rate becomes erratic. Your biological systems are reacting to an invisible, omnipresent pressure.
Then we push the volume to 127 to 133 decibels. The research notes that at this level, you experience a bizarre physical pressure sensation in the middle ear. The sound waves are so massive they are literally physically displacing your eardrum back and forth, even though you don't register it as a sound.
And at 140 decibels and above, we enter the threshold of severe physical trauma. You risk catastrophic mechanical damage to the cochlea. But more alarmingly, this is where specific organ resonances activate.
Organ resonances.
Every organ suspended in your body, your heart, your lungs, your stomach, has a natural resonant frequency. When the high-intensity infrasound matches those specific frequencies, the organs absorb the energy and begin to violently vibrate inside your chest cavity.
The technical term is resonant vibration of internal viscera. The physical result is severe nausea, projectile vomiting, bowel spasms, and intense organ pain. The sound is physically shaking your organs like a paint mixer.
There is a famous historical anecdote that perfectly illustrates the danger of this physiological resonance involving Walt Disney's animators in the early days of acoustic experimentation.
Oh, the cartoon researchers. I love this story. They were experimenting with a massive theater sound system, trying to create realistic environments, and they amplified a 12-cycle sound effects. That's 12 hertz, deep into the infrasound range.
Right. When they activated this extreme low-frequency sound, the artists and technicians in the building became violently ill almost immediately. They experienced profound seasickness and extreme nausea.
How does a low sound make you feel seasick if you're standing on solid ground?
It attacks the vestibular system. Deep inside your inner ear are canals filled with fluid. As you move your head, the fluid sloshes around, moving tiny hairs that tell your brain where you are in space. That's your balance. The massive 12 hertz sound waves were so powerful, they physically vibrated the fluid in the animators' inner ears. Their eyes told their brains they were standing still in an office, but their violently vibrating inner ears told their brains they were pitching on a ship in a storm.
Oh man, that sensory mismatch triggers immediate, violent nausea.
Exactly. At weaponized levels, infrasound can completely incapacitate an individual, scramble their eyesight by vibrating the fluid in the eyeball, or cause severe internal hemorrhaging.
It is the ultimate duality of nature. On one hand, sound is a literal physical hammer. You can wield it to smash a stone inside a kidney, or you can accidentally use it to make Disney animators violently ill. But on the other hand, you can use that exact same mechanical property to delicately, precisely tune the electrical frequencies of the human brain.
It is a beautiful transition because the body is fundamentally an acoustic instrument. The exact same resonant properties that make us vulnerable to infrasonic damage make us incredibly receptive to the healing, restorative therapies of sound. And this brings us to the science of brainwave entrainment.
Let's explore how we actually tune the brain. Brainwave entrainment uses external auditory rhythms to physically shift the brain's electrical activity into desired states. And the most researched tool for this is binaural beats.
Binaural beats are fascinating because they rely on an auditory illusion generated by the brainstem. If you put on stereo headphones and play a continuous tone of 400 hertz in your left ear and a slightly higher tone of 410 hertz in your right ear, a strange neurological event occurs.
How does the brain process that mismatch?
Well, the sound signals travel to the superior olivary complex, a part of the brainstem responsible for integrating sound from both ears to help us locate where a sound is coming from. Because the two tones are slightly different, the brainstem struggles to localize it.
He's confused.
Basically, yeah. To bridge the mismatch, the brain synthesizes a third tone entirely inside your head. This phantom tone is the exact mathematical difference between the two frequencies, in this case, a 10 hertz rhythmic beat.
Think of it like putting a metronome next to a swinging pendulum. At first, they are swinging at different speeds. But over time, the physical vibration of the metronome actually forces the pendulum to lock into the exact same rhythm.
Right.
The 10 hertz phantom beat acts as a metronome, and your brain's electrical waves slowly begin to mimic and synchronize with that 10 hertz frequency.
Precisely. And by changing the math of the tones, we can target specific cognitive states. The research breaks these brainwave categories down clearly. We can start with delta waves, which range from 0.5 to 4 hertz.
Delta waves are the slowest. They are associated with deep, restorative sleep and unconscious states. Entraining the brain to a delta frequency can provide profound insomnia relief and significantly reduce cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone.
Then you move up to theta waves, 4 to 8 hertz. This is the frequency of deep relaxation, meditation, and REM sleep. It is critical for memory consolidation and creative visualization.
Next is alpha, 8 to 13 hertz.
Yeah.
This is that wonderful state of calm alertness. You aren't asleep, but you aren't stressed. It reduces anxiety and provides mental clarity.
Then we entered the high activity states. Beta waves operate between 13 and 30 hertz. This is active, analytical thinking and high alertness. The research highlights a study showing that in training a subject's brain to a 20 hertz beta rhythm, measurably improved their performance on free recall memory tasks.
And finally, the highest state, gamma, 30 to 100 hertz. This is high-level cognitive processing and intense focus. Studies demonstrate that inducing a 40 hertz gamma beat can actually enhance working memory capacity.
It's incredible.
By using a synthesized acoustic illusion, we're literally temporarily expanding the brain's processing power in real time.
The medical applications of this are moving from theory to daily clinical practice. Music therapy is no longer just about making a patient feel relaxed. It is a neurological tool. Rhythmic auditory stimulation has demonstrated the physical ability to improve the walking gait and upper limb function of stroke patients.
Because the external rhythm helps rewire the damaged motor cortex.
Exactly. They even use it to stimulate residual consciousness in patients suffering from disorders of consciousness, or DOC. Patients in vegetative states show increased cortical connectivity when exposed to specific acoustic therapies.
It proves definitively that sound can reach us, change us, and heal us, even when the conscious mind is completely offline.
It does.
But we have to zoom out now. This immense power, the ability to manipulate biology, implant emotional memories, and tune brainwaves, does not exist in a sterile laboratory vacuum. It exists in human society.
Right.
And if sound can control our physical bodies and our brain chemistry, it is inevitable that human beings have weaponized it to control each other on a socio-political level.
Which brings us to the final dimension of our deep dive, the socio-political soundscape. We've talked about how sounds signal danger or comfort, but there is also a very specific acoustic profile for dominance, the sound of power.
The sociolinguistic data on this is unequivocal.
Yep.
When individuals are placed in high-ranking positions or when they internally feel a surge of power, they fundamentally alter the acoustic properties of how they speak.
And as listeners, we are exquisitely sensitive to these invisible cues. We can instantly identify the boss or the alpha in a room based entirely on the physics of their voice, regardless of the actual vocabulary they're using.
And the data on this completely contradicted my expectations.
Yeah.
Like, when I think of the sound of power, I immediately imagine a deep, booming, theatrical James Earl Jones type of voice. I assume power sounds heavy and low.
Most people do.
But the acoustic measurements say the exact opposite.
High-power individuals actually exhibit a higher average pitch than low-power individuals. But more importantly, they use a much more monotone delivery.
Monotone.
Yes, their speech has significantly less pitch variability, but they exhibit much greater sudden shifts in loudness.
A higher pitch and a flat monotone delivery. Why in the world would a flat voice signal dominance?
Think about the psychology of conversation. When you are speaking to someone you want to impress or someone who holds power over you, you unconsciously use pitch variability. Your voice goes up at the end of sentences to seek approval. You modulate your tone to show you are engaged and non-threatening. You're essentially performing for the listener.
But a monotone delivery implies the speaker doesn't need to perform at all. They aren't seeking approval. They aren't checking to see if you are engaged because they already own the room.
Precisely.
Their status is so secure that their voice becomes structurally rigid. They just state the facts flatly and occasionally increase the decibels to hammer home a point.
It is acoustic confidence. And this social perception of sound extends far beyond individual conversations. It defines entire class structures. This brings us to the concept of linguistic prestige.
And we should note, as we discuss this, we are looking through the impartial lens of sociolinguistics, just observing how societies assign cultural capital to certain phonetic shapes without judging the grammar as inherently right or wrong.
Exactly. We are neutral observers here. It's fascinating how sociolinguists track this. They look at things like accents purely as acoustic markers that different social groups use to draw boundaries. The research points to the historical concept of vulgarism, derived from the Latin word vulgus, meaning the common people.
Throughout history, the deliberate avoidance or adoption of specific phonetic patterns has been a primary gatekeeping tool for the elite. A prime historical example is H-dropping in 19th century England.
Right.
Dropping the H sound at the beginning of words, saying ouse instead of house, was a natural phonetic evolution in many dialects, but it was quickly categorized as a marker of the uneducated working class.
So the elites responded by deliberately over-enunciating their H's to acoustically distance themselves. They built an invisible wall out of consonants.
The sociolinguistic takeaway is that linguistic normality is never neutral. What a society defines as the correct or professional way of speaking is almost universally defined by the dominant social class to maintain boundaries.
The phonetics themselves, whether you pronounce the H or drop it, aren't biologically better or worse, but the social weight assigned to them acts as an acoustic barrier to upward mobility.
And society doesn't just build acoustic barriers with accents and vocabulary. We literally build them with bricks, glass, and architecture. This introduces the world of acoustic engineering.
Which is everywhere.
The physical spaces we inhabit every day are meticulously designed to manipulate the sounds we make.
Architecture is applied acoustic physics. In large public spaces like courthouses, lecture halls, or parliaments, the goal is usually to maximize speech intelligibility, ensuring that the spoken words of the person in power are received with total clarity.
Engineers measure this success using a metric called the Speech Transmission Index, or STI.
The STI is measured on a scale from 0 to 1. The research notes that for a speaker to be clearly understood by a crowd, the STI needs to be above 0.6. Below that, consonants get muddy and the message is lost.
So how do engineers physically achieve an STI above 0.6? They have to rigorously control the RT60. That stands for reverberation time. It's the exact amount of time it takes for a sound to drop by 60 decibels after the source stops making the sound. If you're giving a speech, you want a very low RT60. You want your words to hit the audience and disappear.
If the RT60 is too high, your words bounce off the back wall, echo back to the front, and violently collide with the next sentence you are speaking, creating an incomprehensible acoustic soup.
So how do engineers physically stop a sound wave from bouncing? They use two main tools, absorption and diffusion. They use soft, dense materials like acoustic panels filled with mineral wool to literally absorb the kinetic energy of the sound wave, killing the echo.
But you can't just absorb everything, or the room sounds uncomfortably dead.
Yeah, that creepy silent room feeling.
Exactly. So they use diffusion. They design jagged, mathematically complex surfaces on the walls or ceilings to shatter the sound wave, scattering it evenly in 1,000 different directions so it doesn't bounce straight back.
But acoustic engineering isn't exclusively used to make voices clearer. It is routinely used strategically to silence or mask human communication. Modern corporate environments frequently employ environmental sound masking.
They pump specific frequencies of white or brown noise through the ventilation systems. This ambient acoustic blanket raises the noise floor, ensuring that private conversations cannot travel across the open-plan office.
They're using sound to build invisible privacy walls. Or conversely, look at how citizens challenge power. Activists use acoustic amplification megaphones, coordinated chanting, rhythmic drum circles to physically force their sound waves into the heavily engineered spaces of power.
The literal architecture around you right now, whether it's an office, a cathedral, or a city street, was deliberately designed either to amplify your voice, scatter it, or absorb it completely.
It brings our entire deep dive full circle. Sound is not just what we hear. It is a tool of raw mechanical physics, it is a biological trigger that alters our brain chemistry, and it is a sociopolitical weapon defining class and power, all happening simultaneously in the air around us.
It really is overwhelming when you look at it from a macro perspective.
It is. For you listening, just think about the immense ground we've covered today. We started by looking at the microscopic shape of words, how the sharp, plosive sound of kiki and the smooth flowing FL cluster carry an inherent, universal emotional weight.
We track that phenomenon back to our evolutionary survival, linking our modern language directly to the life or death alarm calls of monkeys and the musical, emotional bonding of infant-directed speech.
We examined the deep neurobiology, observing how those acoustic shapes bypass our polite cortex, hacking the brain to release dopamine in the ancient thalamus, and utilizing the amygdala to ensure taboo words are permanently seared into our memories.
We look at the raw, terrifying physics, how focusing the intensity of sound can generate microscopic shock waves to crush kidney stones, or how the massive, invisible wavelengths of infrasound can vibrate our inner ear fluid to make us violently ill.
And conversely, how we can use the brainstem synthesis of binaural beats to tune our brainwaves like a metronome, inducing deep sleep or hyperfocused gamma states.
And finally, we explored the sociolinguistic reality that the acoustic profile of a voice can unconsciously signal absolute power, and that the literal architecture of our civilization is engineered to control the flow and clarity of human communication.
You will genuinely never hear the world the same way again. Every conversation you have today, every piece of music you listen to on your commute, the very echo of the room you are sitting in right now, They are all part of this invisible, multidimensional web of physical and emotional forces playing out in the air around you.
It is a profound realization of our connection to our environment. But the synthesis of all this research points toward a future that raises a very important, highly practical question.
Right.
As acoustic engineering, neuroaesthetics, and clinical therapy begin to integrate deeply, we are entering an entirely new era of acoustic design.
Which brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with. If we now know, as a scientific fact, that sound physically shapes our mental states, triggers automatic evolutionary reflexes, and can bypass our logic to speak directly to our amygdala, we have to recognize the digital world we currently inhabit.
It's everywhere.
We live in a world where tech companies and complex algorithms design every single digital alert, every synthetic AI voice, every notification chimes in your pocket, and every playlist we consume.
Yeah.
If a 10 hertz beat can alter your brainwaves and a sharp phone sting can trigger automatic vigilance, what happens when artificial intelligence maps out the exact perfect combination of kiki and bubo arousal triggers and binaural frequencies? Are we unknowingly surrendering the tuning of our own brainwaves to digital architects?
It's a slightly terrifying thought.
If sound truly is the hidden operating system of human experience, who is currently writing the code, it's something to listen very closely for as you go about your day.
A vital question for the future of our acoustic environment.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Take a moment today to just notice the vibration. Listen to the sound. Catch you next time.
Thank you for joining us for the AI podcast at DigitView.
We hope this episode gave you valuable insights into research AI.
This is DigitView.